So our next speaker here is Peter Kuriyama. He is a graduate student in the lab of Trevor Branch at the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences at UW. He got his biology degree at UC Santa Barbara and saw the light of coming to Seattle. You know, this is really where it's at. Clearly, he's studying the West Coast groundfish fishery. Say that 10 times fast. And he's here to talk about fishing limits called catch shares. This is your advance right there. Laser pointer.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I'm Peter, and I'm going to talk about catch shares, which are a way to manage fisheries. So first I'm going to start by telling the story of fishing. And so people have been fishing for a really long time. But historically, they weren't catching that many fish. And there was sort of this idea that fisheries are inexhaustible. You could go out, catch as many fish as you want. But over time, people got better at fishing. Their technology developed. They've transitioned from these sort of smaller boats to these huge trawl boats, and they were catching a lot of fish. And so this raises the need to limit the amount of fishing that goes on. And so these limits can come in three ways. The first is a limit on the equipment that fishermen use, limiting the number of boats in the water, also limiting the number of hooks. You can limit time in the form of a fishing season or fishing days, or in the case of Alaskan halibut, fishing hours. Or you could also limit the amount of fish fishermen can catch. And so what catch shares are a strategy that have no equipment limits. Fishermen are free to use whatever they want. There's no time limits. They go out, they have a year, catch their quota. But what it does limit is the amount of fish that they can catch, which are right here. And so under a catch share strategy, you could get what's called a total allowable catch. It's the maximum amount of fish that can be taken out of an area. And so what that TAC is, that TAC is then divided into what's called an individual catch share, which is then allocated to individual fishermen. And so the maximum amount of fish that can be caught is calculated by scientists, and it's sustainable in theory. And so what these fishermen are actually allocated is tons. They're allowed to catch a certain amount of fish. It's based on historical catch, so it tends to favor fishermen who have been fishing a long time and are pretty good at it. And so one cool thing about catch shares is that they're transferable. They can be sold or leased, just like you would sell or lease a house. And so this provides ownership incentives. If you own your house, you're going to take care of it so it maintains its value. Similarly, fishermen have incentive to maintain their catch share, abide by the regulations. And it provides flexibility, which I'll get into in a second. And so individual fishermen are often allocated portfolios. You know, there are 100 different kinds of species that are caught, and they're divided up into sort of a strong stock species and a weak stock species. And so a strong stock species is a fish that's not vulnerable to overfishing. An example is the Dover sole shown here. Weak stock species, on the other hand, are vulnerable to overfishing. An example is sablefish. And what we see is that these weak stock species sort of limit fishing activity. And these limits come in when fishermen are given allocations. So say that this fisherman here is allocated 10 tons of Dover sole and 1 ton of sablefish. He goes out with his big trawl boat, brings his net up, finds that he has 2 tons of Dover sole in his net. Also, he has 1 ton of sablefish. So what we see here is that he's met his sablefish quota. So his only option is to stop fishing. But the strategy is that it's flexible. So he has 2 options. He can sell or lease Dover sole quota from other fishermen, or he could purchase more sablefish so he can continue fishing. And so just in summary, catch shares are transferable. There are no equipment or time restrictions. It's just the amount of fish that are caught. And often fishermen are allocated, 30 different fish species divided into these weak and strong stocks. And so this has recently been implemented on the west coast of the US. It's existed in New Zealand and the East Coast, and in British Columbia as well. And so what I'm doing, my research is focused on the changes in fishing behavior that occur because of sort of this weak stock issue and the weak stock constraints. Are fishermen going to certain areas because they know they're less likely to catch weak stock, or is their behavior sort of unaffected? So that's all I got. Thanks.